I wrote today's date in the margin with a pencil stub in my left hand. My right is still trembling. December 3rd, 1942. Stalingrad. It's -20 outside. Snow covers the rubble like a burial shroud. You can't tell where the city ends and the cemetery begins anymore. They carried him in just before dawn. A boy. Couldn't be more than 18. The blood on his uniform had frozen into black crusts. His left leg was missing below the knee. They wrapped what was left of it in a torn strip of curtain. I had just finished boiling water, 2 kettles from the melted ice we collected in the night. I turned when they opened the door and felt the wind slash into the room. For a moment, I could see my breath curl in front of me like smoke from a cigarette. Nurse Marina helped me lift him onto the stretcher. She winced when she saw the wound. "Do you think he'll live?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. We have no morphine, no clean bandages, no light, except the flickering oil lamp. I used vodka to clean the wound, then tied off what I could. He screamed once, hoarse and raw, then passed out. His name tag was still on his coat. Stepanov, Andrei, infantry. The shells began falling again just after we dressed his stump. The walls shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere across the courtyard, I heard the deep crack of a building giving in. Another one gone. Probably the bakery. Andrei's eyelids twitched as if he heard it in his dreams. I covered his face with a damp cloth. He was burning up already. The Germans are pressing harder now. We heard yesterday they've retaken parts of the Red October factory. Their tanks are close. Some say they'll push us into the river before the month ends. But I still write. I write to remember the names of the ones who won't speak again. I write to keep my own mind from unraveling. And sometimes, I write to speak for the ones like Andrei, whose voices are still trapped inside their broken bodies. He's breathing shallow tonight. I've moved my cot beside his stretcher. If the building collapses, at least he won't be alone. Before I was a nurse, before Stalingrad, I was a girl who made tea for her grandmother every morning. We lived in a 3rd-floor apartment in Saratov, overlooking the Volga River. The building was old, bricks the color of dried blood, with wooden stairs that creaked like an old man's knees. My grandmother raised me after my parents died of typhus. I was 6. She was a midwife, strong hands, louder than any man in our block, and sharper than any needle. She delivered babies, stitched wounds, and scolded drunks. When I was little, I would sit on the windowsill and watch her leave with her leather bag, boots crunching the frost, scarf tied tightly beneath her chin. "You learn this work," she told me, "not because it's easy, but because it matters." I did. I studied at the medical school in Saratov, one of only 4 women in the class. Most of the boys thought we were wasting space. Our anatomy instructor once said women were better at comforting, not cutting. I proved him wrong the day I assisted a leg amputation during a factory explosion. I held the clamps. I didn't faint. He never said it again. I studied at the medical school in Saratov, one of only 4 women in the class. Most of the boys thought we were wasting space. Our anatomy instructor once said women were better at comforting, not cutting. I proved him wrong the day I assisted a leg amputation during a factory explosion. I held the clamps. I didn't faint. He never said it again. But there were good days too. We danced on summer evenings by the riverside. We lit candles during New Year's when the power failed. I remember the warmth of freshly baked black bread, the smell of pine resin, the way my grandmother hummed old lullabies while mending clothes. When the war began in 1941, I volunteered for the medical corps the very next day. Not out of patriotism, at least not only that, but because I couldn't imagine sitting still while the world bled. They sent me west, then south, first to Belgorod, then Voronezh. Field hospitals, wounded boys, frozen tents, screams in the night. In September 1942, my assignment changed. Stalingrad, they said. They need nurses there. It wasn't a request, and I didn't hesitate. Before the war, I believed in duty, in helping one life at a time, in healing what was broken. Now, I wonder if that belief still belongs to me, or if I left it somewhere on the banks of the Volga, beside the boots of a soldier too young to shave, but I still carry my grandmother's scissors. And I still keep her picture in my coat pocket, because some things, some people, are stronger than any war. Location, Soviet Union, from Saratov to Stalingrad. Time, June 22nd, 1941, September 1942. The first air raid came before dawn. It was June 22nd, 1941. I was on shift at a clinic in Saratov. A nurse burst into the ward shouting that the Germans had crossed the border. I dropped the syringe in my hand. It shattered on the tile. We ran outside, and I still remember how the morning sky looked so ordinary, blue, empty, while the world turned upside down. That day, the radio never stopped. Fascist Germany has attacked our motherland. Molotov's voice, flat and grave, spread through the corridors. The war had begun. Operation Barbarossa, they called it, the largest invasion in the history of warfare. 3 days later, I packed my bag and joined a mobile medical unit headed towards Smolensk. I had no idea what I was stepping into. By autumn, we were overwhelmed. The retreat from Kiev, bloody, chaotic, senseless, sent waves of wounded back through the rail lines. I worked triage for 20 hours a day. Mangled limbs, shrapnel wounds, frostbite. Men screaming for mothers they would never see again. We set up field tents near Kursk, then had to abandon them under shell fire. By winter, I had stopped writing home. In January 1942, I assisted with an operation in a cattle shed near Kharkov. The patient was a lieutenant, 19. The smell of rot was so thick we used kerosene on our sleeves to keep from gagging. His leg was gangrenous, and we had no anesthetic. When the saw hit bone, he bit through his tongue. He died that night. I stood outside in the snow afterward and vomited behind a fence post. My hands were still shaking when I washed them with melted ice. Somewhere along the front, I forgot how old I was. I forgot how to cry. The front lines shifted. Towns fell. Names on maps blurred into blood and ash. I stopped learning soldiers' names. It was easier that way. I called them by their injuries. The one with the chest wound, the one with no jaw, the boy with no legs. But the call came in late summer 1942. Report to Military Hospital number 73 in Stalingrad, the order read. I thought I had seen hell already. I was wrong. I arrived in early September. The train didn't make it to the main station. Shelling had destroyed the tracks, so we walked the last 4 kilometers. Smoke poured from every building. Planes circled overhead like vultures. Stalingrad was not a city. It was a carcass still breathing. Our hospital was a schoolhouse with no roof. The windows were shattered, the chalkboards riddled with bullet holes. We worked in the basement next to the boiler room. The air was thick with mildew and the stink of infection. Bombs fell daily. We counted time in explosions. The worst day came in late September. A munitions warehouse was hit. The blast took out half the block. They carried in 6 men, burned from head to foot. One of them, a sergeant, was still conscious. His skin peeled like wet paper. He begged me to end it. I held his hand until he stopped breathing. I wrote his name in my diary. Zubarev Daniil, 26 years old. That night, I lay on the concrete floor beside the stretcher racks, unable to sleep. I looked at my hands, cracked, blistered, and soaked in someone else's blood. And I didn't recognize them. The war wasn't coming. It was already here. It had eaten everything, and I was still holding the spoon. Location: Central Stalingrad, near Pavlov's house and the Red October factory. Time: October 1942, January 1943. There were no windows left in the ward, just jagged holes where glass used to be, now stuffed with rags and boards to keep the wind from biting through our patients' skin. We lit oil lamps at dusk and boiled snow for water every morning. The sun hadn't touched our ward in months. We called it the cellar of ghosts. I kept the diary in the pocket of my apron, scribbling between blood dressings and amputations. I had to. If I stopped writing, I feared I'd stop being human. October was a long scream. The shelling never stopped. The Germans were hammering the Red October factory and the riverbank with everything they had. Artillery, Stukas, mortars. You could feel the vibrations through your shoes. Sometimes bricks would fall from the ceiling, sometimes patients. I remember one morning when a young man, Mikhail, sat bolt upright on his cot, shrieking, "It's here! It's here!" before collapsing into seizures. We'd just removed shrapnel from his spine 2 days before. He died before we could lift him back. He was 18, a piano student. I tied his wrists together with linen strips and wrote his name on the wall beside his bed. We had run out of toe tags. Outside, the river had frozen. The Volga was choked with ice floes and shattered supply boats. In early November, I walked through the snow with a stretcher team to collect corpses near Pavlov's house. We passed a dead horse that had been carved open, meat stripped to the ribs. People were eating anything. Wallpaper, shoe leather, soap. There were whispers of worse, but we never said the words. We didn't need to. At the hospital, we rationed bread. 1 loaf, sliced into 17 pieces. Once, a boy soldier named Yuri tried to steal a slice from another patient. I found them both on the floor, locked together like starving animals. I slapped Yuri. Hard. He cried. I hugged him. We both cried. By December, the temperature dropped to -30. Our breath iced on our lips. We warmed bandages by wrapping them in our shirts. The vodka ran out. Then the aspirin. Then the thread. We began sewing wounds shut with hair and boiling needles over candles. There was no more pain medication. When we had to amputate, we gave them a strip of wood to bite and held their shoulders down. Some survived, some bled out, others simply gave up. One man, Petrovich, a miner from Rostov, refused amputation after his leg turned black. "I will die a whole man," he said. He held his wife's scarf in his hand. She was long gone. He never screamed. He just stopped breathing 2 nights later. I cut the scarf into strips. I used it as gauze. The floor of our ward smelled of sweat, decay, and kerosene. We tried to clean, but nothing stayed clean for long. Wounds festered. Rats chewed the corners of our linen sacks. Sometimes they gnawed patients' feet. We kept lanterns burning, not just for light, but to frighten them off. Each morning we checked for the dead before the living. One nurse refused. She sat in the corner humming to herself for 2 days straight. On the 3rd, she walked outside and never came back. In January, we heard something different. Silence. It was strange. Stillness like a lid pressed tight over the city. No shells, no bombers. We didn't believe it. Not at first. Location: Military Hospital, number 73, Central Stalingrad. Time: late January, February 2nd, 1943. It ended on a Tuesday, February 2nd, 1943. The official word came by mouth. No radio, no papers. A junior lieutenant burst through the stairwell door, cheeks red from wind and disbelief. "They've surrendered," he shouted. "The Germans surrendered." We stood still. No cheers, no songs, just silence. Exhausted, stunned silence. And then movement, slow, uncertain. One of the orderlies fell to his knees. I heard someone sob. Nurse Marina fainted. I stood in the corridor and whispered the same word over and over. Alive. We're still alive. But the cost. God, the cost. In the days that followed, the snow melted into red slush. Piles of frozen bodies were unearthed from craters, stairwells, burned out bunkers. Some were ours, many were not. Rows upon rows of German prisoners marched past our hospital under guard. Thin, hollow-eyed, frostbitten. Children, some of them. We didn't cheer. We didn't jeer. Some of our wounded turned away. Others watched with empty stares. One of our patients, an artilleryman named Pavel, whispered to me, "They have mothers too." Then he pulled the blanket over his head and didn't speak for 3 days. But the worst came 4 nights after the surrender. Andrei, the boy from the first night, began to fade. He'd survived all winter, infection, fever, amputation. Even when he couldn't speak, he looked at me with those steady, quiet eyes. I read to him when I had time, Pushkin, then Gorky. He liked poetry. I could tell by the way his eyelids fluttered when I read aloud. But on February 6th, he stopped eating. His pulse slowed. His breathing grew shallow. I sat beside him that whole night holding his hand. The stump of his leg had reopened, leaking something black. We had no medicine left, no gauze, no way to save him. I wanted to scream, to pull the wall apart, to shake the snow from the sky and beg God for one clean needle. Instead, I sang to him, a lullaby my grandmother used to hum when I had fevers as a child. I didn't think he'd hear it, but he opened his eyes one last time. Andrei mouthed something. I leaned in close. "Thank you." He died with my hand on his forehead. We buried him beside the hospital in a trench with 17 others. I made a cross from broken bed slats, carved his name into the wood with a scalpel. Stepanov, Andrei, 18 years old. I've written his name 100 times since, in every notebook, on the backs of ration wrappers, scratched into the side of a burned desk. Because sometimes the only thing we can choose is to remember. I was trained to save lives, but sometimes all you can do is witness the dying. Location: Leningrad, Soviet Union. Time: spring 1946, early 1950s. After the war, I could no longer work in a hospital. Not because I wasn't capable. My hands still remembered every movement, every stitch, every way to stop a man from bleeding out before he even finished whispering for his mother. But because the smell of antiseptic made me shake, I was transferred to a small rehabilitation center in Leningrad in 1946. The building had once been a school for deaf children. Now it was filled with men whose bodies could no longer serve the Red Army. Amputees, blind veterans, burn victims. The quiet was strange after Stalingrad. Too clean, too still. I slept with the window open, even in winter. I needed to hear something alive. Wind, dogs, footsteps. Otherwise, I kept waking in the night, heart racing, searching for stretchers in the dark. I was 29, but I felt 70. No one wanted to talk about Stalingrad. Not in the center, not in the city. Victory posters hung on cracked walls and portraits of Stalin stared down like cold marble saints. But we didn't speak of what it had cost. Not the hunger, not the screams, not the bodies dragged by belt loops through the snow. People wanted to move forward, but I couldn't. In 1948, I married a man named Victor. He was a postman, quiet, limping from a mortar wound in Finland. He never asked me what I had seen. I never asked him what he'd done. We both liked the silence. We had a daughter, Katya. She had my grandmother's eyes. When she was 5, she found my old medical satchel in the closet and pulled it open like a treasure chest. The scissors were still inside, the same ones I'd used in Stalingrad. She picked them up and asked, "Mama, did you fix people with these?" I froze. I didn't know how to answer. "Yes," I said at last. "Sometimes." Katya smiled and began snipping at the air like she was trimming paper dolls. That night, I locked the satchel away and never took it out again. Years passed. I worked in the rehabilitation center until 1952, then retired quietly. My back couldn't take the lifting anymore. My knees ached in the cold. I told people I left because of age, but the truth was simpler. I couldn't hold dying hands anymore. Even now, I remember the weight of them. The way fingers would curl, even after breath had stopped. How warm a forehead could feel right before the body gave in. The war ended, but it didn't leave. It stayed in the soles of my shoes, in the creak of hospital floors, in the hiss of boiling water and the way my daughter coughed in her sleep during flu season. I saved many lives. I watched more slip away, and no medal ever made that feel balanced. Location: Leningrad, Soviet Union. Time: early 1970s. Sometimes I still wake before dawn and reach for the bandage roll that isn't there. Other times, I write. This diary, these pages, they are not for medals or monuments or memory boxes lined in silk. They are not meant to glorify a city buried in ash or paint over wounds that never closed. They are meant to tell the truth, because war makes people disappear long before they die. I saw it in boys like Andrei, who smiled once barely before the fever took him. In nurses like Marina, whose hair turned white in one winter. In myself, when I stopped recognizing the sound of my own laugh. They say we won the war. But winning doesn't bring back the faces. It doesn't melt the ice from their boots or scrub the blood from floorboards. It doesn't return your hands to what they were before they held a dying man's heartbeat. Still, I believe in remembering, because silence is too easy, too tempting, and forgetting is just another way to let it happen again. I tell you this because names matter. Andrei, Mikhail, Yuri, Petrovich, Zubarev. They lived, they suffered. Some were buried without crosses, some never found at all. But I remember them. I chose to.